Alright everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Cyrus. Let's get started. So, I am remaking my old beginner lands video, and before I go any further, I do want to mention that if you just want to skip around, or skip specific points in the video, all the sections of the video will be outlined with the chapter system, on the timeline of the video, so you can skip around if you'd like. Let's go ahead and talk about more about the video, right? So again, I am remaking my old lands video. That video has been taken down from the channel, because I just wasn't happy with that video. I made that video very shortly after the release of Sunbreak. I'd been grinding a lot. I was very tired, and it was very rushed, right? I just wasn't happy with it. And now this video is going to be a little more scripted. I've got bulleted things to talk about, so hopefully I'll be rambling much less in this video than I did in the previous version. And this video will be including more information than the old one as well, especially things like the switch skills, some of the combos, and things like that have been included in this video as well. And those videos, if I've included like the whole video, essentially has been taken down as well. So a couple more videos other than the actual beginner video has been taken down. And I didn't want to go any further before we get started. Do want to mention that when I don't feel the need to be in game to actually show you something, there will be background footage rolling of what I would consider to be average or normal, or I guess realistic gameplay, right? Kind of what you can expect to achieve after spending some time on your lands, right? So again, normal gameplay, right? And let's go ahead and get into it. The first thing I want to talk about in this video is the core of Lance gameplay. So what is the core of Lance gameplay? Well, some people would describe Lance as the thorn that's constantly in the monster's side, and some people would describe the Lance as the invulnerable wall that the monster cannot overcome. And Lance is actually both of those things at the exact same time, right? So the main aspects of Lance, there's actually two. There's aggression and consistency, right? The Lance is a weapon that essentially uses aggression to be consistent. And this might sound weird if you're new to Lance. You may be thinking Lance is a very defensive slow weapon, but in reality this is the opposite, right? Lance is a weapon that's very high pace. You're constantly dealing damage, and you're constantly sticking to the monster. And the way you achieve this with Lance is to use options that at first glance may seem to be defensive, right? You essentially use your defensive tools, your defensive options, to be aggressive instead, right? For example, things like shield charge, right? You essentially can run through an attack while blocking that attack, but also being aggressive to the monster, dealing damage, things like that, right? Using your options to stick to the monster side, constantly poke, do wide sweeps, and just continue to deal damage, right, without ever stopping. And then you might be concerned about mobility of the Lance, but the Lance has plenty of movement options as well, and you use those movement options to stick to the monster. You basically don't really ever sheath to deal with anything with Lance, right? You just simply stick to the monster's side and continue to poke away with it. Again, aggression and consistency. That also means that you don't generally have any super huge burst of DPS with the Lance. Kind of the most you really get in terms of burst DPS with Lance is going to be things like cross sweep after a perfect timed insta block and your switch arts, right? Your Silkbinds, I mean. And that's kind of really all you can expect from burst DPS, and is nothing, for the most part, with some exceptions, particularly spectacular in terms of burst DPS. Again, all about consistency. And that's kind of the core of Lance gameplay. So let's kind of start talking about how you actually deal damage to Lance. First thing I'm going to talk about is some of the more basic and important combos. So combos. The combos with Lance are basically just a free-form combination of Lance's three basic attack options, right? You can do these in any combo you want, with one exception, right? And those three options are the mid thrust, the high thrust, and the wide sweep, which can be charged. The only thing to note is that you cannot do two charge sweeps or two wide sweeps in a row, right? You can do more than one wide sweep in a row, but you can use more than one wide sweep in a combo by doing wide sweep, poke, wide sweep, right? And again, you can do that pretty much any combination you want. You can do like mid thrust into a wide sweep into a high thrust, right? Very, very free form, and you can essentially adjust for your current situation. And that's kind of what you should be doing, right? Essentially just use whatever combo is going to be best in your current situation. And now what I really want to talk about in this section is essentially the shield tackle and the leaping thrust specific ones, right? So with shield tackle, you have the option of this, right? Essentially shield tackle and the wide sweep, rinse and repeat. Now this is a pretty high DPS combo that also doesn't use very much sharpness. It's very, very good for lowering sharpness while also dealing good damage. And that's pretty much all there is that's like, you know, real combos. But one thing I will also mention with shield tackle is things like power guard and leaping thrust. And kind of the main situation where I would recommend you use that is essentially like, let's say you shield thrusted like, you know, past the monster, right? Instead of like just simply doing another shield thrust or another shield tackle like that to get into position, you could cancel the power guard and get a leaping thrust, because leaping thrust is very, very strong. But now moving on to guard dash, which is where you're going to be using the most leaping thrust. There are a few things you can do with this. Similar to shield tackle, you can do things like this. You essentially spam leaping thrust, that's for guard dash over and over. Another thing to mention is leaping thrust only consumes 1 hit of sharpness. So this is much like the shield tackle combo, only 1 hit of sharpness for rotation, right? There's some other things you can do with shield with leaping thrust combos is leaping thrust into 2 pokes, or like leaping thrust into a wide sweep. And then you can also follow it up with another poke if you'd like. And those are kind of the important ones to talk about, right? So let's go ahead and move on and start talking about guard and insta block and which one you should be using. So, fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, this is a very easy choice to make between guard and insta block. Insta block or insta guard basically just outclasses the regular block in every single way. There's no real comparison, to be honest. The standard block is just standard block, you just block things, right? Now, insta guard, on the other hand, a perfect guard does a number of things for you. One, it gives you access to the cross sweep follow-up, which is one of Lance's best DPS options. A perfect guard also removes any and all chip and stamina damage that you would have taken from the attack that you blocked. And another thing to note is that you can actually deal with multi-hit attacks with Instaguard, despite what you may think. I've come across a couple people who didn't know this and actually had to argue with people about this a couple times, but you can actually, after a perfect guard, hit Instaguard again, press the block button again, and you will go into another guard instantly. So you'll have to do that as many attacks as many hit as the attack does. Just be aware of that. But you can deal with multi-hit attacks with insta block. And considering all that, there's just no reason to use the regular block. Because again, they have reduced the penalty for poorly timed blocks, insta guards, and they have increased the window of perfect guarding as well. So it's quite a bit easier than it used to be. Again, basically just no upsides to using block over Instaguard at this point. So use Instaguard. So next, let's talk about something with a bit more importance to the choice and a bit more actual variety. Guard dash and shield tackle. So when deciding to run guard dash or shield tackle, the answer is basically whichever you prefer. Honestly, both are very, very strong. They do kind of serve slightly different purposes, but again, they're both very strong. Whichever choice you make, you can't really go wrong with it, right? But let's get into why you would pick one over the other, right? So first of all, guard dash is kind of easy to go into because guard dash is essentially your DPS option, right? Guard dash gives you very easy access to leaping thrust, which is very good and very strong, especially on elemental builds. It's even stronger. But that said, shield tackle is your sort of your utility and your ease of use option, right? Because pretty much the only thing guard dash has going for it is the extra damage over shield tackle. And I suppose if you prefer the sort of positioning tool that guard dash is, and that is essentially lets you guard dash backward, do leaping thrust, and guard dash backward over and over. That kind of positioning tool can be useful, but personally, in my opinion, shield tackle is a far better positioning and maneuvering tool. That is, in my opinion, one of the benefits of shield tackle over guard dash is that it's even better and more useful for positioning. It did take me a while to get used to it, not having the backwards guard dash, but once I got used to shield tackle, I definitely prefer shield tackle for maneuvering. Now, one of the things that guard dash or shield tackle has of guard dash is that it does actually come with 2 natural points of guard. And that means, so essentially, if you have guard 3, if you shield tackle through an attack, it will be as if you had guard 5 for that attack, right? So you will still take chip damage and stamina damage, but you'll take less during shield tackle. And it actually gets me to another thing about shield tackle is that it doesn't actually cost any stamina use to use shield tackle, right? You shield tackle all you want and it won't take any stamina unless you block an attack with it, right? Unlike guard dash, which does consume stamina. And this can definitely make managing your stamina on guard dash quite a bit more difficult than it is to do so on shield tackle. And especially for a newer player, honestly, you can throw on shield tackle and you won't ever have to worry about your stamina, right? Now another thing, this is really obvious, but shield tackle obviously does do KO damage, and it's quite a bit more than you would think. It's actually very easy to KO monsters with shield tackle, and it's pretty good for that. Now, it does not take sharpness to shield tackle, right? When you hit a monster with your shield, it does not consume sharpness, just so you know. But getting sort of the last thing I want to talk about here, and I kind of already brought it up, is the maneuverability that shield tackle brings to the table. You can turn any direction you want with shield tackle after anything. You can just face that shield tackle whatever direction you want. Very easily allows you to reposition yourself, maneuver around the monster. Very great, especially if you're not super familiar with a monster's moveset. You can very easily fix your positioning without having to like reset your combo or anything, right? Because especially when using guard dash, if you need to like reposition yourself or turn, it can be a little more difficult and take a little extra time. But that said, again, both are perfectly fine options. This is really a personal preference thing. So pick whichever one you like more. Or you just use both. Just go back and forth between them. That's what I do. And I think this is going to be it for guard dash and shield tackle. So now, let's talk about Silkbinds. So for Lance's Silkbinds, honestly, all of them are good. And let's talk about Twin Vine and Sheathing Retreat first, because you know the same slot. So honestly, my advice here would be to have one of both. They're both really good. Sheathing Retreat is a great emergency escape tool. If you absolutely have to use it, it's there for you. It only costs 1 wire bug. It's really, really good. Just you have something to fall back on, right? Twin Vine, on the other hand, used to be really bad, but it got buffed quite a bit in Sunbreak. And one of the things it does for you now is actually when you have Twin Vine on a monster, you do have +2 guard. This is really great for filling in extra guard when you need it, and if you can't fit it on your build. For example, you know, there are some monsters where you may really want guard 5 against, but let's say you normally run guard 3, you can put Twin Vine on the monster and boom, you're at guard 5, right? Well, you know, you can run like guard 1 and then get to that guard 3 sweet spot with Twin Vine either way, right? You know, Twin Vine, obviously it runs out, but it has quite a long timer. It's pretty easy to maintain Twin Vine uptime. Doesn't really take very much effort, but definitely kind of worth having it on one of your scrolls. Maybe put it on your non-main scroll so that that way you usually have Sheathing Retreat active, right? Now for Anchor Rage and Spiral Thrust and Skyward Thrust, well, this becomes a bit more matchup dependent, except for Anchor Rage. Honestly, I would recommend pretty much always having Anchor Rage on. It's a great damage buff. It does allow you to parry an attack without taking any chip or stamina damage if it's a single hit attack, obviously. So it's good for that, but it really is a pretty significant damage buff. Now, Skyward Thrust and Spiral Thrust, on the other hand, is matchup dependent. One thing to note about Spiral Thrust really quickly is that it does actually, the damage buff does stack with Anchor Rage, right? Anchor Rage and Spiral Thrust do stack their damage buff. Really, really good. You can have like a short, like 10-second window where you do ridiculous damage. I think it's shorter than that, but you know what I mean. But when we use Spiral Thrust and Skyward Thrust, does depend on the monster, right? So Skyward Thrust is really only worth using on monsters where it has a really good matchup against, right? This is monsters that have very tall vertical hitboxes or monsters that fly a lot. You know, some examples being Ibushi, Narwa, and the Wraths, right? Wrathless Rathian, all very good matchups for Skyward Thrust, and it's the situation where you would run Skyward Thrust or Spiral Thrust, right? But it's matchup dependent, right? And honestly, other than that, Spiral Thrust is probably the way to go. And now that said, if you've paid much attention to the background footage, you notice I don't use either. I personally don't like using Skyward Thrust or Spiral Thrust. I just use Anchor Rage. That's totally a personal preference thing. I'm not using them because they're bad. I'm not using them because they're bad, right? I'm just not using them because I don't like them. So don't get fooled by the background footage there. And that's pretty much it for the Silkbinds. They're all good. Yeah, you really can't go wrong with using any of them. And yeah, I mean for that. So next, let's talk about dash attack and shield charge. So for between dash attack and shield charge, in all honesty, just use shield charge in terms of optimal, right? Because honestly, the best thing I can say about dash attack these days is that it's really fun to use. And yeah, that's actually, you know, a pretty big plus, to be honest. Dash attack is fun to use. Now, it is a good longer range mobility tool compared to shield charge. Obviously, you can just keep charging as much as you want. You can use that to chase down monsters. It's definitely less stamina intensive, much less stamina intensive than shield charge for sure. But unlike shield charge, it doesn't block while you use it. And if I'm going to be honest, most of the situations where you would want to use shield dash attack or shield charge for movement, you could just use Twin Vine instead, and you would probably be better off. Or you'd definitely be better off, right? Unfortunately, shield charge just doesn't, or shield dash attack just doesn't have much going for it over shield charge. You know, it used to be a good DPS option in some of the previous games, but that's not the case anymore. Unfortunately, it's just kind of fallen by the wayside, right? Now, shield charge, on the other hand, much faster to cast some more stamina, but it does guard during use. If you don't use the poke at the end, the shield charge and its shield bash follow-up obviously doesn't consume any sharpness, and they do KO damage. They do KO damage, and it's actually a pretty good chunk of KO damage. But yeah, honestly, not too much going in dash attack's favor of shield charge, but honestly, both are fine, and both are fun to use. So I guess that's what matters most, right? But let's get into the final section of this video, which is how do you actually start learning lands? So you've looked over everything, you've learned the moveset, and you feel like you're ready to get started. But how do you do it? Well, first, this might seem a little silly or redundant, but make sure you've actually got a good grasp of the moveset. And by that, I really mean the little nuances that Lance's moveset has, right? Because it has a lot of little nuances, like, for example, if you're using shield charge and you do the follow-up, right? You know, the shield bash or the lunging thrust, either one, you can't do another shield charge after those attacks. Or not, you can't cancel them into another shield charge, right? So you'd have to wait. If you wanted to do another shield charge right away, you'd actually have to wait for those moves to recover naturally on their own, and then you could do a shield charge. But you couldn't cancel the lingering of those moves into another shield charge. Little things like that are pretty important to know from Lance, because you do kind of rely on some of them, and catching yourself in a situation where you're trying to use something that you can't actually use is, you know, obviously not ideal. So make sure you've got a good grasp of all the little nuances, and then I'm going to recommend you start learning on Rathian. Rathian is a really good monster to learn new weapons on. She's a pretty simple hunt, but she has pretty much everything, right? She's got projectile attacks, she's got flying, she's got charges, she's got tail swipe, she's got double attacks when enraged. She's got just a little bit of everything, right? It's great for learning new monsters or learning new weapons because of it. Honestly, for any new weapon. And especially since she is a pretty simple hunt, you don't have to, like, you know, if you're a new player, you're not going to struggle too much to learn the hunt itself, to learn the weapon, right? But moving on to what you should actually be doing to learn the weapon, my advice is to start as aggressive as you can. Essentially, just kind of feed your brains out for a while, right? Be fine with carding for it, be fine with getting punished for it. And essentially just take one of those instances where you do get punished for being too aggressive, and then slowly dial things back, right? Slowly dial down your aggression until you're at that sweet spot, right? Where you're just aggressive enough that you're constantly dealing damage, but you're not getting punished for it, right? And the reason I recommend you do it that way is because it's just simply much harder to fix not being aggressive enough than it is being too aggressive, because it's very obvious when you're being too aggressive when you're making a mistake. However, if you're not being aggressive enough and you're not actually getting punished for your mistakes, you probably won't realize that you're making a mistake, right? So you should definitely start by being too aggressive and make mistakes. Be okay with making mistakes and learn from them. But honestly, the most important thing is just simply to play the way that you have the most fun, right? If you want to use dash attack, use dash attack. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Don't let anyone tell you dash attack is too bad to be used. Even me. If you find dash attack super fun to use over shield charge, use dash attack. If you just love spamming Spiral Thrust, spam Spiral Thrust. If you hate Instaguard and you just never want to use it, use regular block. Play the way you have the most fun. Because the best way to motivate yourself to learn is to have fun playing, right? And that's really it, right? And I think that's pretty much all the advice I can really give you. Weapon is a lance that really is just about having a good grasp of your options and using them well. So just learning when you can be aggressive, when you can't be, is pretty much the best advice I can give you. Yeah, I think that's going to be it for the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. Certainly more helpful than the old version. And I believe it is. And I'm feeling a lot better about this video than I am the old one. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. Again, I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll catch you guys in the next video.